My name is Kemi Ukadike, and I'm the project manager at the Rapid Response Program here at IB. And now I'm going to hand it over to our executive director, Roddy.
Thanks, Kimmy, and thanks everybody for joining us today. It's good to see so many of you here on a Friday at noon. And so today is the 5th day of presentations, and I hope that you've been enjoying these as much as we have. Today's gathering is going to be hosted by Brian Droitcour, Associate Editor and Online Editor at Art in America. And it's my pleasure to welcome you all to the event. My name is Roderick Schrock, and I am the Executive Director here at IBeam. I would like to describe myself for any guests who are blind or low vision. This description was penned for me by my partner, the writer June Oluchi Lee. I have brown and gray hair, cut short but floppy on top of my head, as well as brown and gray stubble on my cheeks and around my lips. I have freckles on my face and light skin. I don't wear eyeglasses, but I have thick eyebrows. I would also like to start today with an access check and to orient you to the virtual room. There are a number of IBeam staff members supporting today's event. Please feel free to reach out in the chat box should you need anything or have any technical difficulties getting connected. We're here to assist you with any access needs or questions. And please note that we are also keeping an eye out for Zoom crashers and trolls. Should anyone co-opt the gathering or use derogatory language, they will be kicked out. Today's gathering is being captioned. Hello to Dana, our captioner for the event. We'll also have ASL provided by Rebecca and Veronica, who are all here from LC Interpreting. Mad will be posting directions in the chat box on how to make captions and ASL visible to you if they are not already, as well as other helpful information. Sorry, Peyton will be doing that. And due to the limited amount of time that we have together today, we need to keep the program running on time, so we'll be taking questions in the chat box during the program for the artists. So feel free to add your questions there throughout the program. And for those of you who are getting to know IBeam for the first time, our mission is to center artists in the invention and design of our shared future. We're committed to the idea that artists are a necessary part of not just imagining, but also creating a more humane future, particularly as our digital lives further merge with lived experience. We strive to enable people to think creatively and critically about technology's effect on society by nurturing artists who are engaging and wrestling with the profound changes occurring at this moment. Our newest initiative, which Kimmy mentioned, the Rapid Response for a Better Digital Future, represents IBeam's vision accelerated. This week, we are celebrating artists from all over the world who are doing some of the most inventive and groundbreaking work to push society forward, clearing paths towards a more just future. I am truly honored to have launched this program with this group of artists and to further support their visions, investigating the deep present, illuminating the near future, and imagining worlds to come, drawing bright lines from ideas to impact. It is with profound gratitude that I wish to thank our generous supporters in this initiative. The enthusiasm and fearlessness with which the Henry Luce and Andrew W. Mellon Foundations in particular supported this program from inception to realization is beyond anything I've experienced before. I wish to extend personal thanks to Mariko Silver and Elizabeth Alexander for their leadership. Additionally, I'd like to thank the Jerome Foundation, which has been a longtime funder of our residency program. At the onset of COVID, they generously allowed us to pivot our resources for the launch of Rapid Response. And to the board of directors at IBeam, I extend my deepest thanks for your support in so many quantifiable and unquantifiable arenas. Finally, IBeam is indebted to the longstanding visionary support of the Atlantic Foundation and the New York Council on the Arts. We are also pleased to acknowledge the support of the Beatrice Snyder Foundation and the O'Grady Foundation. Thank you to all of our donors who believe in our work. And if you would like to join them, please go to ibeam.org/support to help fuel this incredible work. And now, I would like to turn it over to Brian, who will be hosting today's gathering after sharing a little more about his work with you. Brian Droitcour earned an MA from New York University and a BA from Carleton College. He lived in Moscow from 2002 to 2007, where he wrote on art for the Moscow Times and art magazine Artronica, and translated essays for a number of exhibition catalogs. Droitcour currently works as associate editor and online editor at Art in America. His critical writing has appeared in Art in America, Parquet, Rhizome, Artform, Art Papers, Dis, and other publications. In 2017, he edited Provision, a temporary magazine of critical writing as part of Converge 45, an annual art festival in Portland, Oregon. In 2015, he edited The Animated Reader, a poetry anthology accompanying Surround Audience, the new museum's third triennial. Droitcour has been a resident at the Shandaken Project in Phoenicia, New York, and the Luminary in St. Louis, Missouri, where, as part of the organization's Commoning the Institution program, he led a workshop with Alison Burstein about institutional voice and communications between art institutions and their audiences. Brian, it's now with great enthusiasm that I turn over today's proceedings to you. Thank you, and thank you all for being here today.
Thanks, Roddy, and thanks to everyone at IBEAM for letting me be involved in the Rapid Response Initiative, which is a really great program. I'm really excited to see everything that's coming out of it. Yeah, my name is Brian. I have light skin and dark hair and beard that are a little shaggy because I haven't seen a barber in a very long time. I'm seated in front of a brick wall, and there is a painting behind me of white houses on a tree-lined street that my aunt made about 60 years ago. Today's event is called Artificial and Natural Intelligence, and I think this title reminds us that there are multiple ways of interpreting and responding to an environment, and that human intelligence is not an absolute measure of the world. And it follows from that intelligence may often be associated with things like logic, reason, objectivity, and science as they're defined in a white European tradition, but there are lots of other possible ways of creating and sharing knowledge. A couple of the artists whose work we're learning about today are concerned with natural phenomena, but I think it's safe to say that all of them are working toward circumventing or dismantling systems of knowledge production that prioritize control over care and that treat other beings as objects to be defined or delimited or classified, and instead are concerned with creating and sharing knowledge in ways that emphasize care and collaboration. That's certainly true of the first artist and researcher whose work we'll be discussing. Mimi Ọnụọha is a Nigerian American artist and researcher whose work highlights the social relationships and power dynamics behind data collection. And she is going to be using her fellowship to work with a team to create an original data set related to land and racial violence in the United States, using data and technological tools to highlight and shift power. So I think we can go to her presentation now.
My name is Mimi, and for my IBEAM project, I've been focusing on underground sites that are places where Black violence and Black resistance have occurred. For me, the most important of these sites is in Sugar Land, Texas. Sugar Land is a city that I grew up in. It's located right outside of Houston. In 2018, my former school district was trying to build a new school. In the process, while they were digging, they found the remains of 95 Black people who had died during the 19th century practice of convict leasing. Convict leasing is a system that's absolutely fundamental to understanding the US and my project, so I'm going to spend a minute talking about it. After the Civil War, the 13th Amendment prohibited slavery and involuntary servitude, but it made an exception for people who had been convicted of crimes. In response, many Southern state legislatures passed laws or explicitly would only prosecute Black people for petty offenses like loitering or breaking curfew or having weapons in a time when everybody had weapons. These Black people who were charged with these crimes were immediately imprisoned, but they weren't sent to penitentiaries. Instead, their labor was sold to private planters or industrialists who would pay minimal rates for the workers and be responsible for housing and feeding them. So in this way, the states made money because they didn't have to pay for housing convicts and could demand upfront fees from the people they leased the convicts to. And those who bought the convicts' labor also made money because they now had a cheap workforce who couldn't demand better conditions and who they could, in some states, literally work to death and replace with another convict. At the same time, the system served as a model to Black people and other groups of people on the outskirts of society of the type of racial domination that they could be subject to at the hands of the state. This was the first time in US history that many state penal systems held more Black prisoners than white ones, and it was really the first time that a capitalist's desire for profit through industrialization and a coerced workforce was so neatly tied to a white supremacist need for racial domination at a governmental, not just individual level. It would turn out to be a kind of blueprint, which is all the more noteworthy because today, many people in the US haven't even heard about the convict leasing system. In my hometown, this discovery of the Sugarland 95, these 95 people who died because of convict leasing, the same system that brought some wealth to the area, caused a ripple of unease through the city. And many people wondered how such a pleasant and innocuous town could sit on top of such a brutal past. But I've been more interested in interrogating the structures and practices that maintained that careful and collective unknowing of my hometown's history, despite the steady presence of stories and evidence to the contrary. I've been more interested in exploring why the bones of the Sugarland 95 were the only proof allowed to cut through that veil of unknowing. And I have also been interested in wanting to tell a story that positions the Sugarland 95 as what they are, which is a national pattern, not just an isolated incident. To do this, I've been working with the Human Rights Data Analysis Group to build a machine learning model that can determine the likelihood that other sites in the United States contain convict leasing era mass burial graves like the one in Sugarland. For the past year, we've been meticulously scouring historical documents and primary sources to gather the data for this task. And that's because in order to do this, we have to have data, we have to create it. We have to collect a clear data set that can tell us the counties in the US that did not, and may have had convict leasing. We have to look at primary sources as well as books by academics that could give us clues into this. And that's what we've been working on for the past year. For the part of this project that was supported by IBEAM, a Rapid Response Fellowship, we were able to assemble a team of about 15 research aides who helped us do this work. With their help, we've completed our first list of sources, and we've cataloged over 600 incidences that will be useful for the model. We still have much more work to do, but this has been hugely significant. I want to mention that there is a huge impossibility and critique that's baked into this project as well. As much as I'm critiquing the way this history of convict leasing has been minimized, I'm also suspicious of the ways that precise computational techniques mix with the unknowability of trauma and history. Why is it that just like those bones, these techniques can serve to break through these structures of unknowability? And finally, the IBEAM Rapid Response Fellowship is about surveillance capitalism, and specifically about exiting surveillance capitalism as the dominant form of digital life. This project has been approaching that question from a different perspective. It's one that insists that our digital life rests atop our many other forms of living. Surveillance capitalism is an extension of racial capitalism, and I think our work as digital artists is to insist on knitting those things together. It's the separation and essentializing of tech that has paved the way for so much damage already. One last point, Walter Johnson has written about how the things that we remove ultimately tell us about the futures we want, and who and what we think should be included in those futures or shouldn't be. In this project, we've been diving straight into those layers of removal. And the goal of that is to insist upon the need for a different way of considering history and considering technology and considering land, and therefore considering the future. I have a lot of thank yous. My main thanks go to the Human Rights Data Analysis Group, who've been helping so fantastically with this project. And my biggest thanks of all go to the summer research aides who had to do so much work just in going through all these sources and cataloging things. I'm so grateful.
Thanks for that presentation. There is a really interesting question in the chat from Ben Bogart about the importance of modeling and collection and creating a data set. Yeah, did Mimi arrive? Yes. Okay, good. Yeah, I'd be really interested to hear that as well, because I think one of the critiques of ML art is how it's sort of reliant, it's sort of harvesting data that is created by other people. So I think it's really important that Amy is working to build that data set, and maybe she'll say more about that in the chat. Our next presentation is from Solar Protocol. This is a collaboration of New York-based artists and researchers Tega, Alex Nathanson, and Benedetta Piantella. They've developed a website whose interface changes based on the amount of solar energy in the battery that powers the server where it's hosted. So they're asking what the internet might look like under a different energy regime that isn't reliant on a constant supply of power from fossil fuels and is more responsive to nature. So we will be watching their presentation next.
The status quo is shaped by a seemingly unlimited supply of energy. Technologies of artificial intelligence and digital surveillance emerge from this context, made possible by a society reliant on cheap fossil fuels. These technologies aim to automate decisions with logics derived from massive data sets produced by systems of surveillance capitalism. And yet we live with a multitude of other logics and natural intelligences that emerge from our shared environment. How might we design with natural logics? What is an internet without fossil fuels?
Solar Protocol is a network of solar power servers that are governed by the rhythm of the sun and environmental conditions at each server location. During stage 1 of rapid response, we built a functional prototype of the network, designing and installing 3 nodes in different locations in New York City.
Our prototype network can be seen at solarprotocol.net. When visiting this platform, you are being served content from whichever server currently has the most exposure to light.
The resolution of this web page is also dynamic and is determined by the level of stored energy in the active server's battery. At the moment, our site has one primary page, which introduces the project, provides server energy data, and network information. When the battery percentage falls below a threshold, the website is displayed in a low-resolution text-only mode. Serving larger files consumes more energy, so this environmentally responsive web design strategy allows the system to run more efficiently when the battery is running low and sunlight is scarce. These static pages are generated periodically with real-time system data. All future content on the network will incorporate this battery-responsive design approach.
The site also features an admin console, which provides granular information about the local server and a snapshot of the network as a whole. It also allows the user to see the other servers on the network, even if they are not the active server at the time. This admin tool will be crucial for remote debugging as we roll out the pilot network. Our system is powered from a number of back-end processes that collect solar data, create the web pages, and compare data between servers to identify which should be the point of contact for the network. We have an API that allows servers to pass data between one another and allows for devices outside the network to interact with them.
We plan to finalize, test, and refine this prototype hardware and software so that it is reliable, stable, and able to be installed at several additional locations around the world. With this infrastructure in place, we will then develop experimental projects in dialogue with our hosts, which will allow us to explore the affordances of computational media that operates with the logic of the sun. The Solar Protocol platform seeks to be a space to reconfigure and reimagine internet technologies to work with natural logics and within planetary boundaries.
All right, thanks for that to Solar Protocol. Our next collective is Apian. They're also working on an interface with the natural world. This project began with thinking about how to automate the beekeeping process by putting digital sensors in beehives, but then moved to creating an intimacy machine that fosters encounters where humans can learn about bees and their behavior rather than focusing on stimulating efficiency and profit in the beekeeping process. And this is a collective of Aladin Borioli, Alan Lapper, Harry Bloch, and Joris Landman.
Hello everyone, my name is Aladin Borioli. I'm a visual anthropologist, an artist and a beekeeper. I'm here today talking from the apiary I inherited from my grandfather. I will introduce you the project developed for IBEAM, Rapid Response for a Better Digital Future. Before that, I will quickly tell you where it comes from. A few years ago, I started a DIY humanities research project called Apian. It investigates the age-old interspecies relationship between bees and humans and vice versa. It looked at the contact zone where the two species meet and surveyed the past, present and future interspecies relationship between humans and bees. Apian has been a place for collaboration. Unfortunately, for reason of time, I cannot bring all of them here today. However, I would like to quickly introduce you the three amazing people I work with to develop the project for phase 1, called the Intimacy Machine.
Hi, I'm Ellen Lapper. I'm a visual anthropologist and I'm also a writer, and I'm writing for the Intimacy Machine.
Hi, I'm Harry.
I'm Joris.
We are a designer and we are Studio Iris Blondman.
We designed and developed the online platform for the Intimacy Machine.
The Intimacy Machine is a polymorphous organic machine that aims to challenge the forthcoming of digital apparatuses within the world of beekeeping. It is designed in order to decolonize techno-scientific practices and hinder the advent of computational beekeeping. This project stems from an ethnography that investigates the forthcoming of electronic monitored hives. Broadly speaking, an electronic monitored hive is not a new hive design, but the idea of filling a beehive with multiple digital sensors in order to track and record bees' behavior. Theoretically, any type of beehive could be turned into an electronic one. However, it is mainly used with a modern hive, which is the standard wooden box that probably all of you have already seen in an apiary. This new technology is used to monitor and record bees' activity in order to make the practice of beekeeping less invasive, more efficient, and in some situations remote. All these sensors are recording data which are transferred to a web platform where beekeepers can monitor their hives from afar and reduce the disturbance for bees. During the fieldwork, however, I quickly realized that the use of this digital technology was coming with a clear embedded politics, which is the idea of monitoring and transforming the practice of beekeeping into a more profitable one. Moreover, in a further future, it could turn hives into cybernetic machines and take the beekeepers out of the equation. No doubt that none of that is designed for the well-being of honeybees. The ethnographic results gave birth to the idea for the Intimacy Machine. Akin to electronic monitored hives, this machine takes the form of a web platform, which was developed with Harry and Joris. However, here it is not about colony management or producing more honey. It is about creating new types of relationship with bees. With the words of Jack Metcalfe, it's about developing intimacy with them, yet without proximity, than rather extending surveillance capitalism to the world of bees. Welcome to the Intimacy Machine. This machine is designed in order to hinder the advent of computational beekeeping and offer a blueprint for future beehives. Simultaneously, it also challenges our use of digital apparatuses in our relation with non-humans. This platform also works as an archive of bee knowledge. For example, you can discover this bee flying with a drone. Here, the robot will learn to navigate in previously unknown terrain by relying on sensory modalities of bees. This research was elaborated by Tim Landgraf at the Freie Universität in Berlin. Or you can explore how bumblebees learn to roll a ball in order to get the reward. And afterwards, they teach each other how to do it. This research was made by Lars Chitka at the Queen Mary University in London. The project will continually evolve with the addition of new data, and at the same time, all the data are supplemented with sources and further information. Thank you to be here today and for your attention.
Thanks to Apian and Aladin. I really like the story that he tells about realizing the politics that are embedded in using technology to mediate these interspecies contacts and thinking about how to reinvent that mediation to use technology toward other ends. Next up is B. Covington Sam-Sumana, a composer and electronic musician who works on critiques of visibility and visuality. They are using their fellowship to research the creation of systems for distributing cultural capital that allow recipients to maintain privacy and not force people to make themselves available to surveillance in order to receive the benefits of this capital.
In astronomy, the passage of one object in front of another object, from the perspective of an observer, is recognized as an occultation. Syzygy is recognized as a collinear configuration of three objects wherein, by virtue of its collinearity, two sub-occultations occur atop two cardinal dimensions. Therein is an object being obfuscated, the object occulting, and the observer, position 2, position 1, and position 0, respectively. Let's assume that within a space of Syzygy that position 2 is representative of some kind of problem space, that position 1 is representative of its complementary solution space, and that from position 0 observation occurs with an aim to understand culture across species, and that the sub-occultation between position 2 and position 1 is construed as a problem solution distance in a fashion adjacent to that of anthropologist Wolfgang Kohler's 1926 comparative study of chimpanzee behavior, where it was that Kohler suggested an extended problem solution distance identifiable in tool behavior. This was what happened in a 2015 exploration of animal cultural capacities entitled The Nature of Culture, an 8th grade model for the evolution and expansion of cultural capacities in hominins and other animals, wherein capacity referred to the maximum range of the evolutionary biological, the historical social, and the ontological individual dimensions of cultural capacities. This exploration staged the problem-solution capacities identified in tool behavior as representative of the minimum cultural capacity available to perform different types of cultural behavior across the evolutionary biological, the historical social, and the ontological individual dimensional axes specified as measures of cultural performance. They cited the problem-solution distance existing for us as a sub-occultation between position 2 and position 1 as being representative of the behavioral route from perceiving a problem or need to its solution or satisfaction, including possible loops or sidetracks. In an observation of an occultation between position 2 and position 1, this is a framework taken at our observer's position 0, where the construal of position 2 as a problem space and position 1 as a solution space leads to a reduction of the sub-occultation between position 2 and position 1 into a naturally arithmetic kind of basis. However, by virtue of the problem solution space's inclusion of possible loops or sidetracks, we can infer that the solution space's constitution inclusive of its antecedent sub-occultation would be of an arithmetic nature and not be antithetically or necessarily dichotomous with respects to position 2 problem space. It could only be causal. Let's say that, now, position 2 represents a geographically contiguous tract of land held and inhabited by multiple nation-adjacent cultures of people. Let's say that in an occultation, some position 1 is comprised of an assortment of identifiably homogeneous singular agents when controlled for age, class-conferred power, and the decision to impose the classification of statehood upon any such land entity characteristic of position 2. In such case, the generic held in place by position 1 then shifts to position 0, and the classification of statehood then assumes position 1, creating a space of syzygy between the three objects. In the 1648 Peace of Westphalia treaties, which were ratified to end the century-long religious conflicts emerging from the Protestant schism in Europe by multiple monarchic powers of the Western and Central European region, something phenomenally similar occurred. The exception was that those parties constituting position organized upon a basis of genealogical relation to the religious conflicts following the schism, plus pre-existing land ownership, and interest vested in recuperating the region following its century worth of populational and comorbid economic losses. The suboccultation existing between position 2 and position 1 produces a shadow just as the one between positions 1 and 0 do, within the space of syzygy. We can understand each of the shadows, or two-dimensional cardinal impacts, of these suboccultations as penumbra, and the arithmetic sum of these penumbra as umbral impact. In regards to this particular space of syzygy, the umbral impact is such that the generic agents of position 0 are, on one accord, able to resurface the peoples inhabiting the position 2 problem space with respects to the modern international system of states, which in the Peace of Westphalia is called the family of nations. Those virtualized within the position 2 problem space, then, get the choice of whether to assemble a phenotypical or class-based generic in response to the position 1 suboccultation, and in doing so, subscribe to the metaphysical prerequisites in which Westphalian produced statehood nests within.
Now, given acknowledgement of some of the new social conditions having emerged from a proper widespread observance of public health during the pandemic, the time spent in domestic spaces and at careful physical distance, with students schooling virtually, cognitive workers operating from home, and physical tradespeople on socially supported paid leave, harkens new opportunity to push past some of the problematics brought on by Westphalian generics. In one direction, this can happen in the green spaces of suburban and rural locales as successfully as they can the small plant racks and windowsill gardens of urbanity. Concurrently, this can happen as we move from being bodies with legible faces moving upright in public commons toward organisms cloaked and cloistered by our radial adjacent domestics, enmeshed and complex with our domestic locales. When I consider the voices of those currently able to yield ambient capital reward, that which are closest to a socialist program of support within capitalist hard frameworks, only those mentally willing and physically able to appease Westphalian generic forms are able to yield consistent benefit, and this can currently only happen when processes of auto-surveillance are at work and able to make legible data for big 5 corporations and their automata in ambience. Challenging this properly involves an acknowledgement of surveillance's connection to the act of survey and identification of survey as a play between land and optics. There must be recognition of visuality as a subset of kinesics, recognition of the fact that the relationship between the visual and the sonic is not lateral. The sonic is the consequence of the kinesic, whilst the visual is its photonic subdomain. We must recall that temporality is emergent from the sonic, which is the prime reason why visuality is able to subvert the temporal, giving us informational exchanges increasingly near instantaneity, and forming the basis for current and the immediately prior Industrial Revolution, the lightness dictated by figures like Italo Calvino. With these considerations in mind, it means not that visuality serves at the seat of the industrial, but that we have made industrialization its consequence, and can unmake this as well. Popular sonics are rooted in the visual. The visual cannot bear the load of all our cultural instrumentations. We must distribute the energetic schema more evenly, and that means liberating popular sonics from visuality's dictates and dichotomies therein. Managing the shift from systems of ambient capital reward reliant on visuality toward those reliant on kinesics requires a shift in cultural focus toward media forms that are more pointedly sonic in nature, even if not aural. Almanac forms offer data in regards to temporal and meteorological conditions, as well as narrative forms and cultural nutritional schemas relating to those conditions. They offer the capability to produce and coordinate movement with the most indirect respects paid to the Julian calendars, upon which our financial economies and existing cultural frameworks have erected. For Rapid Response Phase 1, I've elected to undertake a process of art-based research behind the guise of the founding of a digital almanac entitled The New Millennium Almanac. Offered in such space shall be practical delineation of the shift in ambient capital rewards potential temporal sonic impact, starting with the New Millennium Almanac 2020 Microprize, an attempt to engage a shift of esteem from models of ambient capital reward relying upon surveillance and visibility toward the basis of those offering reward relying upon intrasysteme kinesics. Documentations of this award process and its results are to be made publicly available. In parallel, the New Millennium Almanac offers a small battery of interactive timekeeping utilities and is additionally bound together by a short manifesto-style treaty surrounding an account of the biotic costs of abstraction. This is an account happening via low-rigor interrogations of both the Pyrrhonic skeptical tradition and the results of land tenure measures enacted in the wake of the 1648 Peace of Westphalia treaties. The New Millennium Almanac exists as a temporal sonic mechanism for orienting an eventual whole-loan structure, offering a set of concentric capital reward trusts based upon a collection of fiat liquid EC20 adjacent coins to be umbrellaed under the visage of an independent tokenage system internally specific to the whole loan. The tokenage system feeds the almanac tool, which establishes a specific temporal sonic base of orientation for the whole loan, from which one or even multiple guild-based social trusts, who would be the then beneficiaries for kinesic-based capital, ambient capital reward. From each guild trust would be ideally produced fungal networks of art objects, whether infrastructural projects or monument or public service projects. Currently in development with this whole loan is an H-bar hashgraph EC20 adjacent single coin base, the digital home for the New Millennium Almanac, and the whole loan's first guild-based social trust happening in the form of the New Millennium Almanac Microprize 2020. Each of these moving parts tentatively shall be ready for first look in mid-November 2020, while the first fungal object trust is intended to be trial ready during summer 2021.
Thanks for that, B. I am really interested to see the kind of communities that form around that project and the artworks that come out of it. Next up is Clarice Hill, a practice-based researcher exploring identity through her perspective as an Afro-Caribbean American woman and her societal role as a Black feminist academic disruptor. She is developing a virtual reality web platform to host cultural archives of embodied knowledge. It includes stories, songs, and media artifacts that are organized in a way that emphasize care and collaboration among contributors in order to create frameworks for collective care and dismantle harmful technologies. Let's turn to her presentation now.
The Archive of Residence Time is a web VR archive that is a refusal of systems of knowledge production established through humanism and enlightenment in Western culture. The ideologies behind institutional hierarchies, the privilege of occupying space in the academy and being legible by having value placed on the knowledge produced intentionally leaves out marginalized identities. The Archive of Residence Time takes its name from Christina Sharp's writing on residence time in her book In the Wake, on Blackness and Being.
The amount of time it takes for a substance to enter the ocean and then leave the ocean is called residence time, and I wrote about this in the Wake. So this is a very brief rehearsal of that. Human blood is salty, and sodium has a residence time of 260 million years. And what happens to that energy that's produced in the waters? It continues cycling like atoms in residence time. We Black people exist in the residence time of the Wake, a time in which, quote, everything is now, it is all now, end quote. So those Africans thrown, dumped, jumped overboard in Middle Passage, they're with us still in the time of the Wake known as residence time.
The archive is emerging from the research phase where an establishment of an activating methodology for how the archive will live in time and space was developed. The archive and the entries will live in a standalone website along with supporting material including the syllabus and a field manual for creating an archive which will include the research statement. The archive is not trying to reimagine or change toxic ideologies and systems of knowledge production and their institutional frameworks, but is about creating a new set of supporting cultural archives of materials that include stories, songs, text, photos, videos, and anything else that is necessary for the archive to be sustainable. The archive will collect entries from systemically othered communities to provide resources for establishing a praxis of care for everyday use. The archive is about experiencing the production of knowledge in the circularity where the importance is placed on the knowledge and not the body attached. The archive will be watched over by the ancestor and what is referred to as the now-cestor, who are people living with us that impart knowledge contemporaneously.
So much of what I have done in the past decade can be described as explorations and experiments designed to approach corpus infinitum, not as a destination, but as the unknowable and inarticulable, and yet the already there of existence, or the image of the world that renders decolonization, or the dissolution of the program, principles, and infrastructure of justice, the racial questioning oblige. In these exercises, I experiment with a kind of radical praxis as a knowing and doing that I term Black feminist poetics. They read the world as we know it towards its end, and image existence as it becomes possible when the imagination, released from the grips of the subject's understanding and its ordered world, when the imagination approaches the things deeply implicated world of infinite indeterminacy that is, as corpus infinitum.
Sylvia Wynter says in that essay in one way, elsewhere in other ways, that we need a poetic practice that finds a way, after all of this, to center our relationships, to displace the unnatural violence that the whole definition of what it is to be human in racist, heteropatriarchal, colonial capitalism insists is the only way to be. Dominated or dominant, with resources or without, holding the weapon or being held hostage by it. Something else is possible, she says. Can we describe it? That attempt should be our work, the point of all our art, the great creative act.
The left-hand page is a recursive page. Each verso becomes a recto. Each left-handed page generates one right-handed page, and an infinite number of left-handed pages. What is withheld multiplies. The left-handed pages accumulate with more speed and intensity than the right-handed pages. They are chronic. That is to say, they are always present, occurring, intrinsic and incurable, unfailing and uneasy, like freight. The freight of withholding, gathered over years, becomes heavier and heavier, indefinite and unbound weight.
The collection of the archive entries will be a collaborative development of workshops created with artists and institutions across 3 Western locations. The workshops will consider problems that derive from humanism, systemic subjugation, and statecraft that is specific to that location. The archive entries will be collected from citizens of that location who experience being other. The entries will be collected without names and ages to collapse the structure of knowledge production and return knowledge back to an embodied practice of learning and sharing in a community-centered way. The archive will promote self-care, rest, caring for others, stories of survival, futurity, and the right to be illegible. The archive is transcultural, transgenerational, and is dedicated to living in assemblage with others and to the suggestion of poetics as a multicultural relational dialectics.
Thanks, Clarice, for that presentation and for weaving together contributions to thinking about alternatives to the archive and other ways of constructing the archive. I have been joined by a non-human natural intelligence for the latter part of the event. And so finally, we're gonna hear from Kyle McDonald, a media artist who is working with an existing data set, and his investigation started out by looking at an existing data set and considering the relationships of violence and exploitation that went into it. So let's go to his video now.
My name's Kyle McDonald, and I've been making art about face analysis since 2009. My rapid response project started in 2018 when I read a research paper about estimating body mass index from face photos written by an insurance company. The paper had a diagram, a mosaic of photos of mostly black men, showing that the training data was built on mugshots taken by the Florida Department of Corrections. I was generally familiar with how face analysis is connected to policing and that it's deployed in a way that reinforces systemic racism and mass incarceration, but I didn't know that mugshots were used to build these systems, and this seemed like a profound abuse, so I decided to dig a little deeper. What I learned is that there's this feedback loop connecting face research, surveillance, and mass incarceration. Researchers build tech for face analysis, surveillance, companies sell the tech to police, and police use it to justify arrests. And finally, the mugshots are used by researchers to improve or test the accuracy of their systems. This is just one small piece of a complex system, but in some ways it's reminiscent of the establishment of the Florida prison system itself, which was designed to have prison labor cover all prison expenses. I decided to focus on facial attribute classification in my research. While face recognition names a face, like Kyle McDonald, facial attribute classification describes a face, like white male 30s. As we fight for regulations across the country, face recognition is becoming a less viable option for many police and government agencies, and I've noticed that surveillance companies are pivoting around the controversy. They describe facial attribute classification as going beyond identity and handling the people who are not in the database where face recognition fails. The companies focused on facial attribute classification try to make it clear that they do not provide facial recognition. Surveillance companies like Cognify, Vintra, BriefCam, Milestone, Veritone, CloudWalk, and others are very aware of problems with bias in policing and say they're trying to build systems where human involvement is no longer required, or they want to provide identification of potential threats without bias, and that they are less impacted by implicit biases and emotional responses. Even outside face analysis in the context of predictive policing, companies like Predpol make a point to say that they're not profiling individuals, only providing accurate prediction of crime, location, and time. As I was researching the way this tech is developed and deployed, I came back to thinking about the people in those mugshots, and I wanted to know how it's possible for their data to be so easily accessed and misused. I found that across the country it's incredibly easy to download mugshots and very personal information. Florida in particular has a one-click download for a 2 gigabyte database dump that's updated once a month that can be used to download 500,000 mugshots. I found that most states have easy to scrape access to this kind of data, totaling over 11 million records. Mass incarceration is really complex, and I've been learning a lot over this fellowship, but what's clear is that the most vulnerable people should not be treated as training data. This abuse can be understood as a natural extension of the many ways in which incarcerated people regularly have their basic human rights violated. What I'm trying to do is, with this work, is find some space for creative justice. Reflecting on Angela Davis's observation that prison abolitionists sometimes get lost in the system and forget about the individual, I went back to the body mass index paper. I wanted to understand, where are the researchers coming from? Who are the people in these mugshots? And I decided to inhabit this role of the researcher. I wanted to replicate the method of the research without replicating the violence of the research. And to me, that means downloading and processing all 500,000 mugshots from the Florida Department of Corrections, but not publishing a research paper and not sharing a trained model and not selling my work to be weaponized by an insurance company or police department. And through this process, I get to learn about all the things that the researchers will never write. Some of it's banal, like the typos and glitches and photos that crash computer vision scripts when you try and collect all the data. But I also learned there's many more pieces of information besides height and weight. There's sentence length, charges or convictions, race, gender, age, intended address of residence after release. And any of these things could be predicted just as easily as body mass index by modifying a single line of code. There are hardly any regulations against these kinds of predictions. In fact, they fall perfectly in line with new interest in facial attribute classification. So I came back to that diagram that drew me in initially, that 5x5 grid of mugshots. 5 examples, 5 categories: underweight, normal, overweight, moderately obese, severely obese. In this diagram, all their eyes are barely covered with a thin black bar. After spending some time with these images as data, I realize this bar is not intended to protect the identity of the people in the mugshots at all. It feels really clear to me that this bar is designed to protect the researcher from having to meet the gaze of the people that they turned into a data set. I came up with a plan to remove this black bar and push back and steal these photos away from the domain of abstract quantification. I built a face recognition system for all 500,000 photos that would help me map each mugshot to a person. Essentially a surveillance system in miniature, using the same tools and the same data, but removed from the context of institutional power, which gives me a chance to interrogate the system directly. And I could see these examples of face recognition confusing two people for each other, or I get to see examples of face recognition always finding a match, even when a target identity is not in the data set. When I finally de-anonymized all the mugshots in the paper, I realized another sad and disturbing detail. 4 of the 25 people had been released and 5 had passed away while incarcerated. This meant that a large percentage of the researchers' training data came from people who had already served their time but were still in the database, and perhaps 100,000 mugshots were photos of people who had passed away. These systems are sold to us as pure algorithms for improving society, but the truth is they're built on violence. The violence of the police and the carceral system, that is an extension of slavery. They're built on the erasure of dignity and human rights of incarcerated people, even after serving their time or dying. They become a data set for researchers that do not understand or do not acknowledge their complicity, and their work reinforces institutional racism that makes these algorithms possible. So I'm left asking, what can I do as an artist to bring justice here? Can I subvert and misuse these tools in a way that dismantles or at least like dents the system instead of reinforcing it? I'm really open to dialogue and critique, and I'd really appreciate any feedback. And I want to say thanks to IBEAM for this incredible fellowship, and to the people who have spent time meeting with me, advising, brainstorming, especially Dylan Sung, Edward Kang, the Media Socio-Technical Systems Group at USC, and Adam Harvey. Thank you very much.
Thanks for that, Kyle. I think it's a really powerful idea to rehumanize the people who have been turned into data points by bringing other kinds of data like narrative and biography. And that, I think that speaks to the concerns of other presenters like Clarice and Mimi, who are also trying to reconstitute the archive by thinking about the people who have been sort of erased or exploited by it. And yeah, I think there is a lot of potential for interesting dialogue among these artists. There's also, and I think that's starting in the chat now, there's also been a pretty interesting discussion going on throughout about sustainability and how it gets recuperated by capitalism. I would love to hear more from the fellows about this if we have time for a little group discussion outside of the chat. Do you think we can do that, Roddy? Or
I think that's great. Yeah, we have a little time. That'd be awesome.
All right, does anyone writing in the chat now want to take the floor and mute yourself? I mean, I think Ben Bogart raised this question, you know, is what Kyle's doing, is it still a kind of data collection without consent? But yeah, I mean, I'd be interested in hearing from the artists rather than just reading
I can say something about that. I think it's a really good question. I talked with some friends about this a lot, about what I say in that video was that I wanted to replicate the methods without replicating the violence. And I'm still not sure that that's possible. I think the violence of the system that I was looking into is multifaceted. It comes from the way that the data is used for training these systems. It also comes from the process of collecting that data and publishing it in the first place. And I think for me, when I do something like scraping that data, it feels like such a small intrusion given everything else that's happening. It's a little hard to, it's a little hard for me to see it in the same way. But I think if I'm going to be really honest about, you know, what is happening in that whole system, like kind of engaging with that data in any way that's not, I don't know, that's not somehow kind of directly advocating, it does seem like it's still kind of participating in that system. So I don't know. I think this isn't the first time in my work that I've used a technology that is sort of enmeshed in a complex system of violence. And I have, I believe that it's possible as an artist, as a creative person, to use some of these technologies to push back against them. And because, yeah, I believe that, but I think in this case, it's still difficult. I'm still learning a lot about what that means, if it's possible or not. Is using it validating it, though? Could breaking it and validating it be another approach? That's a good question. Yeah, and I'm like, one of the funny things I ran into while I was looking at this data from Florida, when I was looking at these photos of incarcerated people in this database, is that some of these photos actually like break Python scripts. If you try and load them into you know, with your standard like OpenCV Python loader, which is what all of the ML researchers use for image classification, it just crashes the script. There's some issue with the images, and it made me start to wonder, like, is there any way to inject those kind of glitches and make these kind of unreadable to researchers? And maybe that would be a different, maybe that would be a different approach. I also started looking at the way that, like, sometimes if you pull the data one month and then you pull it the next month, there's usually one or two people who have been dropped from the database, and it's not really clear why, and you can look them up and you don't see any just like explanation for why this person's been removed. There's no news article, there's no release. You know, these systems are really opaque. There's already a lot of kind of failure within the system, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. And I wonder if maybe amplifying those failures is one possible strategy for breaking it. At the same time, I'm, on the other hand, wondering, like, you know, I was talking to, sorry, and please cut me off if I'm going long, Brian, but I was talking to a friend who runs like a small business, and they've been consulting for the Hawaii Department of Corrections, trying to rebuild part of their system that helps track inmate movement and like cases for the kind of the advocates who are representing the incarcerated people there. Traditionally, it had always been done with like these paper folios, and things got lost and shuffled, and people ended up in prison way longer than they should be because their records were lost. And by building this system, they actually started to get like they started to keep things organized in a way that helped people like get in and out more efficiently. And then you have to ask yourself, well, is that like reinforcing the kind of system of mass incarceration and the carceral state, or is it actually helping because it has a really positive impact on a lot of people's lives individually? And so looking at this system, I've been wondering, what would it look like if there was an, open source, corrections database that managed mugshots in a way that made them impossible to scrape. That would be incredible for a lot of people individually right now, in a way that would really help like those mugshots not come up in Google searches, and but still give access to family members who are trying to find out about status and movement of their family. But then again, are you like just reinforcing the system, or is helping a little bit sometimes the best thing that you can do? So I don't know. I think invalidating, breaking are really important questions, but I don't have a clear answer here. I'm still learning.
Hey, thanks so much for that dialogue, and I think we're looking forward to see where this project takes you. And I think that's all the time we have. It's about 1 o'clock now. So I don't know, Roddy, if you have any final words to share.
I just want to say thanks, Brian, and thanks to everybody for attending today, and for all of the inspiring artists who presented their work. It's just such a pleasure to see where your projects are going. And I also want to say thanks to the amazing IBEAM team who put this together, Kemi, Jay, Sally, everyone that's been a part of this. It's just incredible to see what this week is bringing. I would like to invite you all to join us for tomorrow's final event at 12 p.m., the last day of IBEAM TV, at which time we will announce the recipients of the $25,000 Phase 2 award with a special panel conversation with Dr. Mariko Silver, Lisa Kem, Alyssa Blunt-Moorhead, and Ekene Ijeoma. And with that, I wish you all a fantastic remainder of your day, a great weekend wherever you are, and we just very much look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks.